The hits keep coming for Arizona football, and not the kind of hits that we're looking for.
You are Locked On Wildcats, your daily podcast on the Arizona Wildcats. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats. I'm your host, Mike Luke. This show is brought to you today by FanDuel. Check it out. You can put down $5 and you can get over get $150 in free plays if that bet hits. That simple, that easy. Okay, but you got to be a new customer. All right, now the player exodus for Arizona football continues, and it is not good. I think a big part of this, and I think why so many people are confused and concerned, is that Brennan was telling everybody publicly and privately that Arizona was in a very, very good place with roster retention, and that is obviously not the case. And everybody is leaving. And a lot of these, and here's my problem, is that I know for a fact that a lot of these players were going to leave. That is not really breaking any news. That's just the way it is. A lot of these guys were going to break. A lot of these guys were just going to leave. But it's players that all gave this new coach a chance and said, I want to try to be an Arizona Wildcat again. Let's try to run this one back. And it didn't work. Now, I think I think that this is something that if you're Arizona, this is a massive problem. Let's talk first about some of these players that Jacob Manu. Jacob Manu is a player, a Servite guy who was a big time, he's been big time his first couple years. I think that Jacob Manu is kind of indicative of what happened with this coaching staff. Under Jed Fish, Jacob Manu was a monster. He looked like an All-American type, and he certainly looked like he was getting ready the next year for, I certainly believe that he was getting ready the next year for being an All-American. And if you're not being an All-American, at least something like that. Now, a bigger thing, too, that we're also, I think, at the point of is, where is this going then when it comes to any of these players? And Jacob Manu is a perfect example. Jacob Manu wanted to come back here, and he didn't do well. Not only did he not do well, he took a big step back. He also looked at this and said, man, I'm moving on. Just like all these other Servite guys. And I think that's the problem. Noah Fifita is kind of the last man standing here. These are players that wanted to give it a real chance, and it just didn't work. Between Jacob Manu, obviously. Then you got Wendell Moy, another guy. Wendell Moy could have gone to a lot of different places. Wendell Moy could have gone to smelly, rainy Seattle if he wanted to. He could have gone up there to Washington. He's probably going to end up at Auburn. Guess what? Because Wendell Moy is good. Not only is Wendell Moy good, he's the type of player that is probably going to play in the NFL. And he regressed big time. Notice something here. He regressed big time. Not only did he regress big time, he's also the dude who, watching him, it just didn't feel like the coaching staff had any idea what they were going to do with him. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if he's back at Auburn, that he is going to be the guy that doesn't, it turns out to looks very much like the player that we were at. That is just the case here. Now, when it comes to Gunnar Maldonado, that is a even bigger one, because Gunnar Maldonado is a captain. Gunnar Maldonado is a in-state kid, and Gunnar Maldonado is loved by this community. He's got a 6th year, and he decided that he was going to come back, and he was going to back the A, and he got it didn't work out for him because this coaching staff obviously was not good, and all of these guys are leaving. And again, there's more that we're going to get into here in just a second. But I think the biggest problem, though, is that not only are all these guys leaving, I think a bigger concern, though, too, is that they were here for a year, and they basically said, yeah, no, I'm good, man. This coaching staff ain't the ones, these guys aren't the ones for me. And we're going to talk about it in a second. What kind of defensive coordinator, what kind of offensive coordinator wants to play or wants to be able to coach in this? But these are all guys that should be better than that should have been better than they've shown. And like I said, if you've got a track record of being good, I think that we're kind of at the stage where you should be able to be. I think you're at the stage too where you should be able to be show something here, and they haven't been able to show anything. These players leaving, this is a massive indictment on this coaching staff because they're all very talented, and no matter what anybody says, they wanted to do well here. They wanted to, and again, I give them a lot of credit. All of these guys could have left last year. They're leaving this year, but they gave Arizona a chance, and I think that's all that anybody could have said is give them a chance. Now, another one is Tacario Davis. Tacario Davis definitely took a step back this year. I don't think there's any doubt about it. Tacario Davis turned down probably $500,000-$600,000 from LSU, Michigan State, etc., to come back to the U of A, and he just wasn't nearly as good. His head didn't look in the game, and you could say some of that's on the players, and you're probably right. Some of that probably is on the players, but at the same time, when all of these dudes are regressing, that to me is still an issue. And I think a bigger concern too is that I think a bigger issue too is that with this coaching staff, you also know that they're probably not going to find a lot of players. Now, again, just by attrition, you're going to find some players, but you're not going to get guys like this. The biggest thing with Brent Brennan is you inherited a staff, or you inherited a pretty darn good roster, and you kind of made quick work of it. Yeah, getting that out of there, that to me is still the issue that we're going to continue to have with Arizona football as long as this does go on, because Brent Brennan does not feel like he is going to. He just doesn't feel like the guy that's going to be able to get this done. Tacario Davis enters the portal. Traden Stukes enters the portal. Basically, who do you really have left at this point? And I think that's the concern. You don't really know who you have left. And I think, again, I'm going to keep going back to that. Looking at all these players, looking at everything that's in here, these guys are out, and I would not expect them to come back. I expect them to be more. But I think a bigger concern, though, about this coaching staff, or with this coaching staff, though, is that these are good players that have been around high-caliber coaching, and they decided that this just wasn't for them. And it's basically across the board. There's some other things, too. We're going to get into the social media aspects in a second. But, again, Brent Brennan saying publicly and saying privately that he believed that, they were in good shape to retain this roster. They weren't. I knew this. I had people in there that were telling me these guys, like Gunnar Maldonado's gone, man. Like, so the fact they thought Gunnar Maldonado was coming back, that's an issue. I knew. And I'm a guy with a podcast. There's no reason that I should know that when a coach who's making over $2 million a year doesn't have any idea. And I get people all the time, they're like, Mike, why are you so critical? Well, there's nothing to be complimentary about. It's like if you go into a restaurant and they just keep feeding you garbage, you're not just going to say, man, I really wish I could look on the bright side of this sandwich that tastes terrible. No, you don't do any of that. Nobody does any of that. And that's what these players did. Like guys like Jonah Coleman, Ephesians Prysock, although Prysock, the way that he left, I thought was kind of stingy. But all of these guys, I don't blame them at all for leaving. And Brent Brennan, again, I get this all the time. People are like, oh, well, he didn't have all the players. I get all that. But at the same time that he didn't have all of the players, this is still a situation with Arizona football, too, where you should have been able to get some players. Again, you inherited 3 good offensive linemen. I totally get all of that. And you should have been able to get somebody in there who at least could make this unit passable. Not only did you not make this passable, you turned this into a unit that was maybe amongst the worst in the conference. And that to me is a big, big issue. And it just kind of goes back to player development. If I'm a coach and I'm recruiting against Arizona, I'm saying, listen, look what they did to all of these guys. That's not going to be something that Arizona's going to be able to get back from. That's just the way it is. And the fact is, too, and we're going to talk about the market for some of these players, because the market for some of these players is going to be intense, and there's going to be a lot of movement for some of these guys. We're going to get to that in just a second. But first, FanDuel. Check it out, FanDuel. Here's the great deal with FanDuel. You can put down $5 and you can get $150 in free plays. That simple, that easy. Here's the deal, though. You know this. You have got to be a new customer, and if you win, if you hit, then you are good to go. FanDuel. Check it out at FanDuel.com. Again, you got the NFL here. You got the NBA. You got college football. You got college basketball. And with FanDuel, the other thing about it is you also know that your money's good. You can bet before a game, you can bet during a game, or you can bet futures, and everybody's using it. Again, watch the NFL and say to yourself, you know what? I think I got a little bit better idea than they do on what's going on. Check it out again at FanDuel.com. $5, get $150 if you're a new customer and you put that down and you win. Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats. I'm your host, Mike Luke. All right, now let's talk a little bit about where Arizona is then with these players. These players that are leaving are good. They're good. Not only are these players good, they're guys who are going to be in a situation where you look at Wendell Moy, probably going to end up at Auburn. Probably going to start at Auburn. Wouldn't surprise me at all if in 2 years he's in the NFL. You look at Dalton Johnson and you look at Takario Davis. The rumors are for them, Texas. They're probably, again, I don't know that they're going to play in the NFL, but that's a big-time school. You look at Traden Stukes. That guy's going to have some options as well. Gunner's going to have some options. Obviously, Kean Burnett is going to have some options. Tai Uiagalelei, who we haven't even gotten into, he's going to probably end up in smelly, rainy Seattle. These guys are all going to big-time programs because they have a lot of talent, and I think that's where this is all frustrating for Arizona fans, is that you inherited a pretty talented team. And the other thing, too, you didn't bring in anybody, really. You brought in a couple San Jose State guys, and Marquise Groves-Killebrew wasn't bad, but you didn't bring in anybody. And again, the problem that I also have, too, is when people talk about this, and they're like, oh, well, he got into the portal late, and all of this stuff, yada, yada. Jedd Fisch, in his last year here, in the last portal, the one that Brent Brennan would have had all the time with, he got Taylor Upshaw, he got Big CO from Indiana, and the previous year, a guy like a DJ Williams. You can get guys that can at least kind of, buoy what you're trying to do. That just didn't happen. And they didn't get anybody, and then they blamed injuries. Meanwhile, you're running off good players. You're running off a big Bill Norton, who, by the way, is at Texas. You're running off a Deuce Davis by telling him that he's too small and that he should go to the and then if he went to the Big Ten, he wouldn't be good enough. Well, he was a Big Ten Player of the Week a couple weeks ago. Deuce is going to be a monster as well. So you've done a bad job of evaluating talent. I also don't understand too why you are at this stage in the game where you do know that Arizona is just kind of in a tough spot here, because there's going to be more. It would not surprise me in the least if Genesis Smith enters the transfer portal. Noah Fafita is the good soldier. Noah Fafita wants to stick around. His pops obviously wants to, but sooner or later you're kind of the last man standing. And if you're the last man standing, how do you really go about doing that? So that's also an issue for that I think that people need to keep an eye on. It's just bad all the way around. There's no way to sugarcoat this. There's no way to sit here and say that there's anything that you could possibly think good about this. And again, it's having no real idea about what's going on with your roster. How am I knowing things that you don't know? That's an issue. And again, I'm going to keep coming back to it. That is an issue. That can never happen. I didn't know anything on this, like with Jedd Fisch. I didn't know anything behind the scenes that he didn't know. Or, just guys like that. That just can't be. That's a very unique situation for a football fan, and I think it's something that you look at and you're just like, man, that ain't good. Something about this ain't good, and you just kind of know it. All right, now, what is that next step? What's that next step then? Genesis Smith, like I said, he's got a lot of really good charity stuff going on. But at the end of the day, if you're Genesis Smith, you probably also got to be able to figure out what you want to do as far as, being able to make money going forward and putting yourself in the best position to get to the NFL. And maybe, heck, maybe he thinks that is at Arizona, or maybe, Arizona just says, all right, we're just going to pay you like $1 million, come back here because we got to stop the bleeding. I don't know. Noah Fafita is the interesting one for me. Noah Fafita is, listen, he and his family are absolute great people. I don't blame them anything he does. I would not blame him at all for doing that, because he is he and his family, just great folks, great people. But I think it's hard if you come back because you don't have anything in front of you. You don't have an offensive line. Everybody's gone. Now, again, you might say, well, they're bringing back, Michael Wooten or Matthew Lotto, and that's with all due respect to those. Those guys aren't good enough. And you saw from before, you also saw in the portal, all the offensive linemen that Brennan brought in, they all stunk. They weren't good enough, period. You also, from a receiver perspective, you generally don't get better by losing guys like T-Mac. You generally don't, and you bring back Jeremiah Patterson, our guy, cool, but you still got Sam Olsen back as your tight end. I mean, I know that's a big thing for Brent Brennan, but that's not I don't know that that's necessarily a winning strategy. Then you look at the defensive side, and there's nobody. You essentially have nobody. You got Tay Brown, that's cool. But from a secondary perspective, you lost everybody. And I think what's frustrating for so many people is that going into the year, it was a loaded secondary. Now, again, you lost depth on the line, no doubt. You certainly didn't bring in anybody. Trey Smith was all right, but I think the bigger problem though, and I apologize about that, is I think the bigger problem is that with Arizona, you also got a situation where you don't really have any faith that anybody's going to, you really don't have any faith that he's going to be able to rectify this situation. Now, if you're an OC, let's talk about it, whether you're a Seth Dagey, whether you're a Craddock, do you really want to come into this spot? Sure, you're going to get a lot more money, and that is obviously a big part of that. But I think that sometimes people take a loss, financially to get a gain. I don't know that I'm going to walk into a situation where I'm like, all right, this is going to I get paid more, but guess what? My coaching career is going to take a massive hit. If I'm at Marshall and I think I'm a year or two away from getting a big time OC job, I'm probably waiting this one out. And I know the argument too, where people are like, well, these guys always think that they can figure it out, or, whatever the case may be. Cool. I just don't really know that. I buy that one, because you're going to be coaching, or you're going to be playing for a staff that doesn't have a lot of, that doesn't really know kind of what they're doing, or at least that's what they've shown. And not only that, you're also in a spot too where I think it's very, very difficult to see yourself being successful next year. And if you lose Noah Fafita, what do you really have at that point? Essentially, you have an entirely new roster. Now, I will say, I think I like Alonzo Carter. I think Alonzo Carter does a very good job, but that's essentially it. I mean, from a wide receiver perspective, you lost all those guys. You lost Robert McDaniel. You don't really have anybody coming in. You lost Terry Shelton. You lost Toncora. These are all dudes that could have played immediately, and they're all gone. Sean Robinson on the defensive side flipped from Texas to Texas Tech. That's another issue as well. But again, there's something here, and we're going to talk about this coming up here in a second, that I still think is probably the elephant in the room. Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats and making this your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Mike Luke. My biggest problem is these guys are veterans. They've been around. Not only have they been around, they've seen, they've been around successful coaching, and they watch this and they're like, man, I got to get out of here. And that to me is just something that I just cannot get past. From the player exodus to, these are guys that wanted to stick around and they didn't. And again, there's going to be more that's coming. And some of these other guys as well, like an Emmanuel Carnley. Now, again, anytime you spit in someone's face, I'm kind of out on you. There's some things you don't do in sports. That's one of them. But you look at, well, in schools that he's looking at, Miami, for example, a lot of these guys are going to be able to go to pretty much anywhere they want. And these are players that look like they took a big regression under Brennan. That is just something that just can't happen at this stage in the game. And I think that's kind of where we're at now. What are realistic expectations going forward for Arizona? I think realistic expectations are that I think you're probably going to be the worst team in the conference next year. Now, listen, if Deion Sanders leaves Colorado, I can certainly see Colorado being the worst team in the conference. I expect so. Maybe Arizona is going to be in there for that. But this is going to be a bad team. This staff hasn't shown that they can coach anybody up. This staff hasn't shown that they can get anybody ready. Not only has this staff not shown any of that, they also haven't, I don't think they really have any players that are believing in what they're trying to do, their thought process, all of that. So so that's kind of where we're at. This is going to be a totally different team next year. And, it's just kind of the way it is. From looking at players, that weren't good enough, from looking at players that just basically had no clue what they're doing. Coaches that had no clue what they're doing. They kind of behaved themselves into this situation. It's kind of like what everybody said. It's impossible to look at this situation and say that there is anything about this staff that leads you to believe that things are going to end up okay. You watch Brennan and he talks about it and he says, you guys are going to love you guys are going to love every minute of it next year. Well, we're not. And there's other things too. When you're talking about roster retention, just basic things that lead you to believe that he's just in over his head. And I think that's just kind of where we're at. But again, losing Jacob Manu, losing Wendell Moy, losing Gunnar Maldonado, losing Takario Davis, losing Dalton Johnson, losing Traden Stukes, losing Speedy Luke, losing Kean Burnett. I mean, this is just, nobody's coming back. Everybody looked at what Brennan had to offer. And that's the other thing, too. In his presser, when he's talking about, and he says, well, if you want to be a bandwagon or go make money elsewhere, then so be it. Well, they're taking you up on that. Again, when you're a 19 or a 20-year-old kid and you know that you can make more money elsewhere, you got to sell somebody on wanting to be there. He did none of that. Not only did he do none of that, he was basically in the spot, too, where you're like, I've seen enough, and you're going to move on. And again, the people around him, too, they stink. They're not good enough. I'm sure they're nice people. They're not good enough. There is no community understanding here. The fact that you had Jonas Sabanea declare for the NFL draft, and even a bigger part is there was no tweet from the staff account, anything. Meanwhile, you got Kenny Dillingham, Deion Sanders, who quote tweet basically everybody that enters the portal. That to me is just the issue here, is that other coaches get what this guy just doesn't get. And that's not really his fault, but this is much more of a you can just see this is more of a San Jose State. This is more of just a mid-major feel to it. And I don't think that is going to change. You've been on the job now a year, and I haven't seen anything to indicates that he, understands what he's in for or what he's trying to do here. And again, I think you either have that at this stage or you don't. And I think that's where Arizona is in a lot of trouble. Now, DRF has said that he needs a fair chance. I'm pretty sure that this was a fair chance that he just had, and, he failed it. But listen, I like Dave Hickey a lot. People know that. But this was an F hire. This was a catastrophically bad hire. That's what Brennan has been. He's in well over his head. And at the end of the day, that's on Dave. But at the end of the day as well, DRF has now essentially said that, he deserves a chance. I couldn't disagree with her more. I think that sometimes you just know when somebody is in over their head, that this is one of those situations. So we're going to find this one out. But again, we're going to start talking about some offensive coordinator names tomorrow. I'm sure more players are going to enter the portal that we're going to talk about, but this is a tough time. But again, it is what it is. I think everybody could have seen this kind of coming, maybe not Brennan, but it's going to be tough for Arizona, and this is not going to be a good football team next year. This one is just not going to end well. And the community's shook, obviously, and when you have a coach that doesn't really do anything to reassure anything, that's just kind of where you're at in the process. So that's just kind of where we're at. And then we're going to talk a little bit Arizona UCLA basketball. That's a must win for Arizona. You have to be able to beat UCLA because, again, you haven't beaten anybody good out of conference, and this would be a good win against a Power 5 team. They defend like crazy, but they also can't shoot. This is a game that you certainly hope that you're Arizona, you could win. We need some good news, obviously, with Arizona football and the way that this is all basically disintegrated incredibly quickly. But as always, very much appreciate you all making Locked On Wildcats your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Mike Luke. Bear down. Back the A, and we'll be back with you tomorrow talking some more Arizona football.